Welcome everybody to TheTitleFight.com. Steve Gallegos and Gordie Tamayo here. Going over last night's one-sided demolition from Manny Pacquiao. Came in after a long hiatus, had been out of the mix for a little well over a year after his stunning knockout loss to Juan Manuel Marquez. You know, he looked like he had definitely done his due diligence here and picking up where he left off. Some things were still a little bit off, but I mean, somewhat expected, especially after the last knockout loss that he had and kind of how he was going into camp with this one. But Steve, we got to see a side of Manny that, you know, most people were lingering with question marks over and wondering what version we were going to get of him, whether it was going to be the one that was psychologically broken from his last shocking defeat, or if we were going to get the Manny of old, and we kind of seen some glimpses there. What was your overall impression of Manny?
Oh, I was very, very impressed with Manny's performance last night. You know, it seems like the passion is back. We haven't not seen a performance like that from Pacquiao in quite some time, you know, probably last time we saw him put on, you know, a virtual clinic like that, you know, where he was in and out, moving to the side after landing hard shots. We haven't seen that since really the Cotto fight. So it was very good to see him, you know, back to that old form. Yes, he was fighting someone in Rios who was tailor-made for him, who stood in front of him, you know, but he still looked very good against a very hard, you know, puncher. And, of course, you know, even though Pacquiao dominated that fight, he made sure he avoided, you know, dangerous exchanges because Brandon Rios, you know, obviously hits very hard, and, you know, he did not want to get into a firefight with Rios. So he looked very good, you know, even against Tim Bradley, which he clearly won. You know, Pacquiao looked bored in that fight. You know, he was just, you know, fighting in little spurts, you know, not really putting combinations together. He's fighting more or less not to lose instead of to win. This time he was just going for the gusto, and, you know, I loved it. It's great to see Manny back. His career is not over. We still got a lot left to see from him.
Yeah, no, he looked great. You know, he didn't get in those exchanges, like you said, with Rios, who at any point in time, even though he wasn't able to really get into motion and really land anything solid consistently, he was still dangerous at any point in time, and Manny did very well using his angles, great footwork, just outclassed him and literally embarrassed Rios. At the end, you could tell that Rios was very, very frustrated. He even kind of snapped at Max Kellerman when Kellerman asked him about, you know, the circulation of him just being a punching bag and target practice for Manny Pacquiao. But in reality, he really was. Very game Rios as always, but he was just completely outclassed. Where do we go from here? Already it's being circulated that Manny's going to be making a return for early next year, and some possible opponents on the table. Steve, you had mentioned Bradley. He's possibly looking to go back and take a rematch on that controversial defeat. You know, who knows? Maybe the Marquez fight isn't even out of the mix still yet again, even though Marquez says he's done. What makes the most sense for Manny at this point?
Well, either one of those fights, you know, would make sense. You know, they were both highly talked about, you know, because Bradley, you know, Manny's got some unfinished business with Bradley. You know, loss of face is a big thing for Manny Pacquiao. He got robbed in that fight, probably the worst decision in the history of boxing. He needs to get his revenge on Bradley and go in there and make a huge statement, you know, and you know, get back what he lost. And then, you know, also they were talking for the longest time about a fifth fight with Marquez. You know, it was a fight that they had been talking about, could have happened, you know, this year, you know, either, you know, the end of this year or, you know, during Mexico Independence Day weekend. So, and of course, that's a fight fans would all like to see, you know. I mean, they fought 4 times, 4 great fights, you know. Manny still has to get some revenge back for being brutally knocked out on his face. And, you know, I think he's got some scores to settle. So I think either one of those fights would be great for him. You know, basically, there's not very many options outside of those, being the fact of the Cold War between that top-ranking Golden Boy. He's going to have to fight someone from the top-ranked stable, and so far those are the only fights that make sense.
Going forward with him, there's already talks about what fights are in the mix with him. Obviously, the Rios-Alvarado trilogy would be something that a lot of fight fans would eat up. But sitting ringside, you know, another interesting matchup was that's been talked about here for a minute now too, is Ruslan Provodnikov, you know, one of the sparring partners with Manny Pacquiao. and putting him up against Brandon Rios. I think it's too soon, Steve, soon to throw a guy like Provodnikov in the mix with Rios, especially after coming off of a defeat like he did last night?
Yes, absolutely. That would be way too soon to throw him in with someone like Ruslan Provodnikov. I mean, Provodnikov hits very, very hard, and he's definitely, his skill level's definitely improved. And he stands toe-to-toe with a guy like Provodnikov. He's seriously going to hurt himself. Yeah, if I was Rios' handlers, I'd put him in, 1 or 2 fights against, some fights that he can win, why not? His last 3 fights have been 3 hellacious wars, where he's taken a lot of shots, this fight and the 2 fights with Alvarado, so he can use a bit of a break right now, whether it be, a long layoff or, if he decides to get back in the ring, get him with someone where, he can get some confidence back, take a tune-up or 2, then go back in, fight them big fights. A fight with Provodnikov, would eventually be a war, that could be fight of the year right there, seeing them 2 go at it. Or, a rubber match with Alvarado, that would be great too, both of them are coming off of bad losses, maybe both of them take tune-up fights and then fight each other maybe next summer. That could also be, that's the fight, all fight fans want to see.
Sure. Yeah, either one of those matchups is going to be interesting there, and Rios always comes and brings the heat, so fans know what they're getting every time he steps into the ring. But definitely earned a nice paycheck last night. I think he can deserve a little bit of vacation. I think that's in his best interest health-wise before he comes back and laces them up again. One of the segments that we're going into place here with you, Steve, here recently, we've been working on a Forgotten Legends piece. And we're going to be introducing the fight world to some of those fighters that have been in the mix that maybe have been kind of just overlooked as time has passed, but have definitely contributed a large portion to the sport of boxing. Just recently we released a piece by Luisito Espinosa, which came before, the Manny Pacquiao, came before the Nonito Donaire. If you could, Steve, go ahead and drop a little bit on who Luisito Espinosa was and why it was so relevant that we, put that out there just before this last bout.
Well, Manny Pacquiao has been the face of the Philippines for the last decade, a national hero. He's the hero, all the people love because he's a small guy, who would defy the odds, and became this national superstar. But before him, there was another very great fighter, in Espinoza, who was long and lengthy, had a great boxing punching style, and excited fight fans, all over the world. Not so much here in the U.S. He fought at featherweight, and defended his title, probably about 7 times over 3 years, and against some really good competition during that time. And of course, the big fight during that time was a fight with Prince Nassim Hamed, and and basically when he fought Kennedy McKinney in 1998, almost 15 years ago. He made a huge statement, and of course, it was marketed as the winner is going to be able to court with the Prince. The winner was going to get that big money fight at Hamed, who everybody was trying to fight, between 122 and 130. And, of course, the fight didn't materialize, obviously, Hamed, picked and chose his opponents, and, of course, he did not want to fight someone, who was as dangerous as Espinoza. So Espinoza fought a rematch with a guy that he had beat before, Cesar Soto, lost a controversial, unanimous decision, pretty much on Soto's home turf, being that it was in El Paso, a border town. And Soto ended up getting that fight against Hamed, which was an ugly foul-filled fight in which Hamed actually body-slammed Soto. I think had Espinoza been in the ring that night, it could have been a different story, and, Hamed probably could have been given his first loss had he faced him. But unfortunately, he didn't really get to that pinnacle, that could have shot him up, got him some bigger fights, the big money that he was searching for, but it didn't happen, he's one of those, unsung heroes that, won a couple world titles, but didn't really get to that level that he should have, so that's what we want to focus on with our Forgotten Legends series, we're going to focus on some of these unsung heroes that, that gave boxing fans, that helped shape the sport to what it is today, but didn't get their due that they should have gotten, so...
Steve dropping some boxing history for you. Keep tabs with what we're going to be bringing out. We're going to be doing something regular on a piece like that for Forgotten Legends, so I'm going to be bringing you and introducing you back to some of those greats in the sport of boxing and just paying tribute back to them. Well, I want to thank you all for tuning in. Again, Steve Gallegos and Gordie Tamayo with TheTitleFight.com signing off. Until next time.